Well, thank you once again for joining us for our Friday afternoon Gulf of Mexico update. Today, I get excited about shows, but this one I'm really excited about because things were brought to my attention by one of our guests, Dr. Janet Starr Hull, and I started looking into things. And there's a lot of stuff I didn't know living all those years in Texas and now here in Florida. And there's something called the Earth expansion theory about the Gulf of Mexico. And that was all news to me, but then I started digging into that. There's lots of ancient volcanoes in Texas and coming up in the Mississippi, and even one at the mouth of the river, Mississippi River, called the Door Point volcano. I've learned a lot just trying to figure out what this show is going to be about. So I'm really excited. I've got two guests on. The first that I just mentioned, and you've heard her on my shows before, Dr. Janet Starr Hull. She's out there in East Texas, not too far from where I used to live, actually just down the road. And one thing that we've had with Dr. Janet in past shows is about detoxifying and such, and she does have her doctorate with I've got a blank now, with natural and nutritional health care and such. But she does have her bachelor's in geography and geology from University of Texas at Austin, and her master's in science was environmental science at Texas A&M. So this is a part of Dr. Janet that we haven't heard on my show before. And with her is her researcher and an editor for her internet sites, and it's Christy Whitaker. And just to get the main things out of the way, if you're not in our chat here on Blog Talk Radio at Living Light Network, if you're not signed in and you're hearing this in the archives, you can find out about Dr. Janet Hull at janethull.com. That's a good place to start. She's got her newsletters, everything there. That'll get you to all our other places. And in case that name might be familiar with some of you, she was one who authored the book called Sweet Poison about aspartame and such, of her own experience of detoxifying herself with it. So check out Dr. Janet Hull, and you'll understand why I'm excited to have her as a guest again. I always am. So let's see, we got all that out of the way. And if I get lost here, I have a really bad connection. And if I get lost, they're just going to continue with me until I call back in. But Janet, I believe I've got you on.
I hope so. You hear me?
Yes, worked out great. Let me get Christy on here. Christy, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you just fine.
Well, see, everything's working good now. We had a lot of fun. At least I did for 10 minutes before the show started. I was losing everything, so I guess we had to move those lightning storms out of the way so I could have my connection.
Good. That's
anyway,
Michael, just move them out of the way.
That's right. I had to move them out. There are things that now both of you are really going to get into details and such. I want to bring up some generalizations and then just start in and let everybody know what this stuff is. I wasn't aware, Dr. Janet, until we spoke a few days ago. I never heard of the Balcones Escarpment that goes basically from Sherman, Texas, up there by Lake Texoma, which is where used to be my stomping grounds, and then going down to Dallas and Waco and San Antonio. Never heard of it before till you brought that up. I never heard of something called the Door Point volcano, which is at the mouth of the Mississippi River. I never heard of the Jackson, Mississippi volcano, which actually the city of Jackson, Mississippi sits on top of the old ancient volcano. I never heard of the Monroe Uplift. I never heard of the Murfreesboro, Arkansas volcano. And something new that is kind of blowing me away, that there was actually a ring of fire in an arc going from West Florida
up towards southeast Arkansas, and then coming back down along that Balcones escarpment line down into Mexico, called the Ring of Fire, with all these volcanoes. And I know there's a lot more than that, but I just wanted to get that for an opener. So where do we start? Let's start with this. What brought this up, your phone call to me, Dr. Janet, was about the video that was going viral on the internet with YouTube about 1 o'clock in the morning on Central Time a few days back, where there was 100-degree water basically all along the northern coastline in Mississippi and into Texas somewhat. And it was considered a really odd anomaly. Well, I guess it ends up that it's kind of almost expected, and that's what this show is about. So, Dr. Janet and Christy, start in there. What do you think caused this, and what is this Earth expansion theory? Start giving us some background. You're the experts as far as I'm concerned, so I'll shut up and go for it.
Well, I don't know, Michael. You're doing a really, really good job there. I mean, you pulled it together pretty well. I think that what you are sharing with the listeners is what you experienced yourself initially. It's like, wow, all of this was going on in the Gulf. And what we have done with the Gulf of Mexico, the Mississippi riverbed, going along the coastline of Florida, coming on up into the Balcones around the Austin area of Texas, and shooting straight down into Central America, where it all loops back around there to the Caribbean islands. We have an ancient Earth fault zone there, where we had our original separation from South America and Africa, millions and millions of years ago, when the continents split apart. And once upon a time, that was a very active volcanic ring, just like what we're seeing right now at the Pacific Ocean, the Ring of Fire there. And, there's in the Llano Uplift in Texas, there's what they consider an extinct volcano. We have them really all along the Gulf area, onshore and offshore. And because this is so ancient, we're talking hundreds of millions of years old, we just assumed that they were inactive, just extinct and no longer a worry or a threat. But the Earth is waking up right now. It is heating up internally for many reasons. It is heating up externally from the heating up of the sun. And we have some polar shifts going on, both magnetic and geographic shifts going on. And we have a lot of Earth movement happening right now, where the entire planet is making shifts. And so there is no such thing as an extinct volcano or a fault zone, an earthquake fault zone that is no longer active. There is no such thing. Every crack, every hole or portal, which would be a volcanic plug that releases pressure from the inside of this massive planet, will always be an active release location. And what we're looking at with the Gulf is some areas that we thought were long played out in dormant, and they're not. And that is something that even geology books haven't updated yet. We're looking at an active Gulf earthquake and volcanic zone that is extremely ancient, at least 250 million years old, but it is not inactive, nor is it dormant. It is coming back to life. The interior heating of the Earth is expanding, which is this Earth expansion theory you had mentioned. The interior of the Earth is heating up and getting hotter. So it's like looking at boiling water or boiling magma. And it's bubbling and rising and expanding as it makes its way to the cooler Earth's crust. But as it does that, because it's expanding and boiling, it's taking the crust and literally heating the crust up, and it's venting out with magma or even just outgassing. And it's coming out every orifice on this planet. Those are old earthquake zones, those are old plate boundaries, and those are old volcanoes and new volcanoes. And so what we're looking at in the Gulf is heating up at the crust, at the ocean's floor. It is heating up, and it is expanding, and it is rising. And as it lifts, so it appears that the Gulf of Mexico is lifting up with an underflow channel of liquid molten rock and heat. And as it begins to lift up, it then will start using those openings of the oil wells that we have drilled in the Gulf. All right, so what we're looking at is an expansion of the Gulf floor underneath the sea floor at the bottom of the Gulf, and we're watching it expand. And the vent holes that we have created through the pegboard of oil well drilling, Michael, that we see now at the floor of the Gulf of Mexico, at the sea floor, they are now becoming vents for this rising magma and for the heat that is expanding and building up underneath the Gulf floor. And so what we're looking at some of these wells are exploding, as we well know with the BP oil spill, and we're looking at cracking in these pipelines, and we're looking at venting with the Gulf as it rises up in elevation with magma underneath the seafloor, and we're watching this come up, and it's affecting the hundreds and hundreds of oil wells that we have punctured the Gulf of Mexico sea floor with. So we're seeing those results in that respect.
Well, as for the uplift, mentioning the uplift on the west side of the Gulf and in Orange, Texas, there has been localized flooding recently, but there's not been rain. And I discovered that after we noticed the 100-degree water temperatures, between Houston and up and around Louisiana. So that, to me, and I think to you too, Janet, says uplift.
Well, and Christy, you just recently went on today and captured some information about some recent fish kills in Florida that actually happened today on the 22nd of July.
Right. In North Naples, there was a fish kill, evidently lobsters, cowfish, toadfish, eels, which you said were deep water species.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, having been watching all the fish kills and the bird kills and everything, it really seems to me that the outgassing that we're experiencing from the volcanism under the Gulf is probably contributing in a large part to the fish kills that are really happening everywhere. They're happening off the Pacific coast as well, along California shores and Oregon shores.
Well, I think I'm back, guys. Here's something odd about this fish kill that started actually 5 days ago or so. It's not just one fish kill, it's been continuing. Something odd about it is people that I've spoken to, particularly a person on Bonita Beach, said, there was the fish kill one day, then we had a little bit the next day, but the third day, the water was murky black that was coming ashore. So I don't know what that might be a sign of, whether it's some of the oil or perhaps some of the heating, as I presume that you've been speaking about since I had to cut out here and try to get a connection. Some of this magma flow heating way deep down in there might be heating up the salt domes with that outgassing that you had mentioned, Dr. Janet, and perhaps that's killing the fish. The dark color, I don't know. It could be from Again, the oil that's still sitting there, all the dead zone, we might be getting it closer on the continental shelf in southwest Florida. I don't know. You'd have to have a boat and a submarine, I guess, to go find out.
Well, you know, Michael, a lot of the information that we are getting mainstream is not giving us the whole story, if any of the truth at all. What's going on in the Gulf, just from a pure geologic base point, is that we've got an ancient volcanic area. Now, that doesn't mean that these are going to be volcanoes that are going to become like Mount St. Helens or Mount Baker. They're not going to plume up above the ocean's water surface and then start erupting like a traditional cone volcano. Instead, what we're looking at here is we're looking at what they call an asphalt volcano. And that is just literally a channel of flowing magma, sort of a surging flow of undersea liquid molten magma rock. And we're looking at this flow, and it has been flowing under the Gulf of Mexico and under Texas and Louisiana and Florida for millions and millions of years. But because the Earth is heating up right now internally and externally, so the heating of the Earth is exponential, actually. And we're seeing that with these record temperatures, but we're seeing it with record ground temperatures, water temperatures. And as it begins to heat up, this magma, again, expands and it rises as it begins to try to vent itself out at the crust in these fracture zones and old volcanic plugs and through the oil wells that we have punctured into the Gulf of Mexico's floor, seabed. And when there's a salt dome present, like many are present along the Florida coast there, well, this magma, that's a weak part in the crust, you see. So this magma is going to be able to rise higher up into that salt dome and be able to push itself up. Well, when all of this is occurring, then the temperature of the water is rising and the temperature of the crust is rising. And the water that's running underneath Florida, that temperature is rising. So we're looking at these fish being heated too quickly, and we could have a plume of heat fire up from underneath one of these salt domes, and that could literally boil some of these fish. So we're seeing these fish kills, these schools that are dying rapidly. But keep in mind that we have so many oil wells, and Christy had located some incredible maps of all of the oil wells that are drilled in the Gulf of Mexico. And I want you to look at that map and visualize a pegboard. We've taken the Gulf floor and we've just put a hole here, 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 here along this grid system and then connected all of those peg holes with these pipelines. And as the Gulf begins to heat up and expand and rise and push up towards the surface, it's going to impact these holes, these pegboard holes that we've punched into the seafloor. So if they were watching murky, kind of oily-looking water, tar-looking water floating onto the shore of West Florida, who knows what other pipelines have been impacted and are leaking, what other old wells that have already been drilled and set may be broken and leaking. We're focusing on that one BP well, but there are hundreds and hundreds of other oil wells in the Gulf that we need to be also focusing on because they will be impacted by this heat and this magma and this rising of the Gulf floor because of these asphalt volcanoes.
Well, and also the dead zone, I want to say something about the dead zone. Right now it's currently estimated to be about 3,300 square miles. And the latest estimate that I have found is within this year, it could possibly grow to over 9,400 square miles. So that's not just a doubling in size. That's almost a triple in size. And we were talking about exponential damage from everything going on. And I think we're seeing that in the enormity of the fish kills and the animal deaths.
Well,
Yeah.
back in June of last year, right after Deepwater Horizon disaster started, first of all, let me mention that was the deepest well that was ever drilled at the time, and there was a lot of speculation that they hit into an old reservoir of asphaltic oil, which, according to the geology that I could find, again, I'm not the expert, you are, Dr. Janet, that would be about right. And there was also a problem that even NOAA on their ships had shown that in June through August, they had put in their report, and I've still got the graphic of it, and I'm looking at it right now, not very far away from where the Deepwater Horizon drill site was, is what's called the Biloxi Dome, which is a salt dome. And they had shown 7 leaks or plumes of oil coming out of there at the same time that we saw on the cameras and all the bit about the Deepwater Horizon wellhead that was, either blown off or was leaking or whatever. But nobody has mentioned any of that since. Now, Dr. Janet, you said to me on the phone when we talked the other day, you said when you have this hot asphaltic oil that's real deep like that, and it's right above the magma, then that hot oil goes in towards, it seeks to go up and goes into the salt domes, of which are some gigantic salt domes, not only in the Gulf of Mexico, but also in Mississippi, even by Jackson. I think that's the second largest known salt dome in the world is in northern Mississippi. So you have this magma, then oil reservoir, which is asphaltic oil, then you have the salt domes. Now as this hot asphaltic oil starts to heat up the salt domes, that's, I presume, the outgassing that you're talking about. What kind of gases would come out of that? And I think you mentioned even sodium chloride and things like that, way beyond just methane.
Right. Well, and what you're looking at here, boiling oil, okay, and you've got a pocket. The Gulf is so rich in oil, Michael, because it is an ancient sea environment. And so as it began to, there are times to where we've had the coastlines all the way up to Austin and Dallas, and we've had times to where the coastlines have gone, past 200 miles into the Gulf, to where we've had the coastline has been exposed in the past. So it's gone back and forth as this sea environment. So when these salt domes formed and the oil was trapped within them, it became an incredible, rich oil-producing environment. But as the magma going underneath it has been cooler in the past, we haven't seen any of these kinds of reactions. But now that the Earth is heating up so drastically, really, we're looking at this magma rising and the temperatures rising, and so that's literally going to boil this oil. And then when it boils the oil, it becomes a low-quality petroleum oil, anything that they're going to want to take out and refine for machinery. It becomes tar-like, asphalt-like. And so what we're looking at here is a different kind of byproduct. We're looking at literally this asphalt. And as it goes into the salt domes, okay, not only do you have methane then from the organic petroleum, but you also you're heating up sodium chloride, lots of sodium chloride. So when that chlorine releases, that's going to release as a chlorine gas. So we've got methane and chlorine gases, and we've got sulfuric acid, we've got sulfur gas. So we're looking at a very, very, very toxic ambient environment once this gets released. And it's going to release into the water first, and this is going to kill fish as well. It's going to mutate them. They're going to have stillborn births. We're just looking at a toxic environment that's not only solid and liquid, but it's also gas.
Well, and we're seeing a lot of stillborn dolphins washing up, baby dolphins dying pretty much immediately after birth, right there in the Gulf. But another thing that was concerning to us is not only do you have these natural geological processes associated with volcanism, but you've also got Corexit added into the mixture. You've got floodwater runoff from the Mississippi adding into there. So,
Good
you know,
point.
there's never been any testing to see what is all that going to do when it's all mixed together. All the fertilizers based with nitrogen, the geothermal heating, the Corexit. It's pretty scary if you think about it.
Yeah,
Well,
the Gulf is a toxic brew at the moment.
Right.
Yeah, it's a mess. Then add a little synthetic biology in there to try to eat up the mess that they made, and boy, have we got something that we don't know what the results are going to be of. You know, chemicals, organic toxins, which are bad enough. And I wanted to go back to the asphaltic oil and bring that point up. Asphaltic oil is very deep oil. And, you know, here the Deepwater Horizon, just from the surface of the water to where their wellhead was, is a mile deep already, just in the water. And then they went down there another couple miles, 3 miles. Yeah, this is super, super deep oil. It is not typical oil. It's not Texas sweet crude. This is asphaltic oil that they tapped into. And I think they kind of disturbed the mess by what they were doing, because there have been reports since May of last year of other wellheads where they have been leaking or have blown, one of them even at the mouth of the Mississippi River, and everybody's kind of forgotten all this. So
Right.
I think
You're
what
right.
they disturbed the asphaltic gigantic reservoir that's there being heated by the magma right below it. That was the first point that I wanted to get out. Second, as you mentioned, Dr. Janet, but I want to stress it, the volcanoes we're talking about, basically these asphaltic volcanoes, are not like Pele or, you know, these explosive things that come across and spew lava up into the air and ash and all that. Explain the difference of what these asphaltic volcanoes are, and explain between both of you, you as well, Christy, how does this magma flow, and then how does that affect the groundwater, and where are we seeing those effects besides the obvious from a few days ago, right there at the coastline of Mississippi and East Texas, also inland of Texas, I believe, going out into the Panhandle. How does all this work together? Explain how that is from the asphaltic volcanoes, so to speak, how the magma flows and where it flows based on this old geology and on signs that are now popping up.
Okay. The old school way of looking at a magma flow is a convection current, like when you're boiling an egg in a pot. The heat comes from the bottom, which would be considered the core of the earth, and then as it heats up, it starts pushing away it starts expanding and pushing the water out, and it bubbles up to the top, cools off as far as it can go up, cools off, and then it just moves over to the side in both directions, east or west, and then it hits a solid, the side of the pan, or it hits the side of a continent, and then it just goes back down again, and it heats up again, and it just forms this sort of movement, this half rectangle in the pot. But there are some more advancements now in that thinking, and it's called surge tectonics, and that is what I personally believe is the up-and-coming way of looking at the movement underneath the crust that we can see. It's a flow, okay? It's a surge of this heat, and it's moving like a river, if you will, underneath the crust. So it comes up from the core, it reaches the crust, it can't go any further, it moves over to the side, cools off, and goes back down. That we will agree with. But the thing that we haven't stopped to think about, Michael, is when it's underneath the crust, when it has bubbled up from the core of the earth and it's heated itself and moved as far up to the crust as it can, that movement underneath the crust, that sideways movement under the crust, that is something that we need to take more seriously, and that's what's happening in the Gulf of Mexico. It's surging up from the Caribbean islands where we have a spreading center. And if you look at a map, you will see that there are huge trenches, and we've got subduction zones and then spreading centers, meaning that parts of the crust is going under the North American plate and parts of the crust is being pushed from the Atlantic towards the Pacific. So we've got a border around the Caribbean islands where Florida and the Caribbean and the Yucatan used to all be connected together, okay, where the Gulf was one round pool. It didn't have any openings. Well, that's all been splitting apart and moving around. So that takes the magma underneath the earth, the heat underneath the earth. It rises up at this border here, and then it turns left, and it goes up underneath the Gulf of Mexico. And it's a river, a stream, a current of hot liquid rock. And as it begins to move, it's moving up towards Texas. It's moving up the New Madrid. It's moving onto the shore of Florida. But where this channel, it keeps going underneath the North American continent, and it flows all the way up to Nebraska under the old Ogallala Aquifer that some people may have heard of. But it also goes under the Rockies, and this is the flow that we're looking at that eventually meets up with what's underneath Yellowstone. Okay? So we've got this river of flowing heat and river of flowing liquid rock underneath our continent. Well, as the Earth begins to make these changes and earthquake activity is increasing and volcanism is increasing and the ice is melting on both the poles and on the continents, glaciers are melting, and our sea levels begin to rise, what we're going to see is the Gulf in the United States, North America, is going to lift, and it's going to get pushed up a little bit as we see the Caribbean islands drop and go down a little bit. So we're going to see some changes in our coastlines, and we're going to see some changes in the shape of the Gulf. And that's what's happening with this stream of underground moving liquid heated rock.
Well, and I like to liken it to baking bread. When you bake bread, you end up getting cracks and fissures in it. So imagine you're baking, you've got the hot magma up under the Gulf floor, and when things are heated like that, they expand. And so you're expanding the Gulf floor and opening up these fissures and opening up these cracks in the Biloxi Dome, like you mentioned earlier, Michael. And in fact, all over the world, we are seeing evidence of fissures in Ethiopia. There was one in Mexico this past week, huge fissures in the land opening up. Well, we can't see them, but there's fissures opening up underwater as well.
One of the things one of you sent to me, I believe, the heat flow in Texas, there was a scientific study done. And this, to me, seems to show around Dallas-Fort Worth area of things heating up. And I wanted to ask why the water seems to be heating up. Basically, Dr. Janet, where you live, my old stomping ground, and then also out in the Panhandle in Texas. Oh, okay, if that water is heating up, why? And what's that a sign of? You know, kind of put this together for us, because most people are not geologists, and this is all news to me in the past couple of days. It really is. This is like astounding.
Well, it's all heating up because we've got that boiling pot of water, or what we're looking at. Well, it is actually water. It starts off as the boiling liquid magma, and then that heats the soil, and then all of the water that's on top of the soil or within the soil, streams, rivers, water wells, even just the pores in the soil that used to have moisture in them, it gets heated up from the bottom, and as it gets heated up, then it evaporates. And then once it evaporates and there's no moisture in the air, then you have no rain, no clouds. Boom. You've got deadly drought, and that is, if you were to follow where the drought is in Texas and all along the coast of Florida and Louisiana, Mississippi, and Alabama, there you would see where our magma surge, where that river of heated rock is flowing underneath the crust. That's what we're looking at. All these areas that are in severe, severe drought, they're heating up from underground. They're heating up from underground. And this is all happening in the Gulf of Mexico also, under the Gulf Sea floor. It is so hot and heating up that it's literally beginning to boil the Gulf of Mexico. And that might be okay if all it had in there were fish and really nice natural things, but it is also heating up and boiling a pegboard full of oil wells, and it's heating up the oil that's underneath the Gulf as well. So we're just looking at a boiling pot of petroleum and tar in the Gulf.
That kind of explains a lot of things about Deepwater Horizon. It really does in my book, that not only being the deepest well that had been drilled as an exploratory well in the Gulf of Mexico up until that time, the best rig in the world to do it, which is Deepwater Horizon. Amazing engineering in that rig. It was, I've studied on that too, just unbelievable engineering to be able to do what it did. Anyway, no doubt they had to have tapped into perhaps the side or somewhere from the top of this asphaltic oil reservoir, which obviously under a whole lot more pressure than typical oil at much shallower depths, and also much more dangerous, more thorium and radioactive uranium and such was in it. So, I wonder what were they thinking? Why did they want to drill down into that? And now they've created a problem in a lot of the wellheads, and perhaps all of them, with pressures and blowouts and pipelines that are leaking like crazy. And how many thousands and thousands of miles of pipelines are lying on the Gulf floor along the continental shelf in the northern Gulf, that some of them are back there from the 20s and the 30s. Mm-hmm. My question that I've always been baffled at, which probably, really has nothing to do with this subject, but why would you want to tap into that?
Greed.
Well,
greed.
Yeah.
And not only that, but you have to look at it as an entire system. It's not, they punctured and we had the Deepwater Horizon mess, but it's a whole system. And because of the interrelated pressures amongst the different oil wells, when you affect one like you did Deepwater Horizon, there's going to be consequences for each other area. And then if you look even bigger at the Gulf of Mexico itself as a system, and I'm talking the ground and magma underneath the Gulf waters itself, the air above the Gulf waters, it takes huge amounts of heat to change water temperature. And so when we saw that spike the other day of 100 degrees, 100 degrees, that's a tepid bath water. But it took so much energy to raise that coastal temperature water to 100 degrees. It's also then going to leach into the air. And so that's going to be contributing to drought, storms, which unfortunately we haven't had any storms because we haven't had any rain. But, it's all a big picture that goes straight up into the air.
Yeah, it's affecting the whole region. And, Michael, I know that you had mentioned something about the toxicity and how many people have been getting sick along the Gulf. Mm-hmm. And I think that if we pull together everything that we've brought to the table so far, we've got what Christy had mentioned. We've got the chemicals that the oil companies are injecting into the Gulf. We have the chemicals that are washing down out of the Mississippi River. we have the methane gases, we've got chlorine gases, we have so many pollutants that are in the Gulf of Mexico right now, and then what we're looking at with these pollutants is we're turning up the heat. So we're literally cooking these pollutants. And it is just exacerbating now the atmosphere. It's exacerbating the air and the ozone levels that are over the water themselves. And then as they lift and rise higher into the atmosphere over these coastal regions, it's affecting now our weather and wind patterns. And that's a point to bring up as well, too. The Gulf of Mexico used to have a really nice circulation, flow. And we're looking now that the Gulf is getting so hot, and we have very little circulation left in the Gulf now. The Gulf is becoming rather stagnant.
Yeah, the Gulf Loop just about is non-existent.
Right.
Mm-hmm. And whether that last BP well was the 100th monkey on this thing, or we've just over time just slowly killed it, just slowly killed the Gulf. Or it's a combination of all of the above. But the Earth is at this point at one of its highest resonances, meaning that its interior core of this Earth is ramping up. And our magnetic field is the lowest that it's been in 2,000 years. So we're looking at a very weak atmosphere. That means that our atmosphere and our magnetic field is very, very weak right now. So the heat on the interior of the planet and the heat underneath the Gulf floor is overriding the atmosphere. And so we are looking at just massive, massive changes in the ocean flow and in the flow of the winds up in the jet stream and all of the winds in the upper atmosphere. We're looking at some major, massive changes.
No doubt. If we've got the magma, I don't know if I would even want to call this a theory, because it seems like it's way beyond a theory at this point, Earth expansion theory. I think it's a reality. That's my opinion, because we're seeing the signs of it being a reality. I want to bring up Jackson, Mississippi, which is the old ancient Jackson, Mississippi. The capital of Mississippi is built on the old ancient, what they call the Jackson volcano. And it's about a mile down below the surface. Their temperatures for their water there in one area within that 420 square mile area where that old volcano is have recently risen to 100 degrees as well at the surface. So it's Jackson, Mississippi. We're talking about, what did you mention, Dr. Janet, in East Texas where it was flooding and you saw that on the news? Orange,
Texas,
Okay, and that's right there on the coast.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. These are signs that we better pay attention to. These are not just odd anomalies. And then there's the thing that I just brought up earlier that one of y'all sent to me, the heat flow in Texas study showing even the water in the Panhandle heating up, the water at Dallas-Fort Worth, and the groundwater heating up. And then where I'd like both of you to go next is explain, like this Balcones encarpment, that's the fancy name for it. Explain what that is that runs down part of that old fire ring, so to speak, of the old volcanoes.
Right.
Explain that and how it goes up into Arkansas, then comes down by Jackson, and then how does that tie in with the Madrid fault and such? Explain the geology with this. Are these fractures from when everything tore apart, or are these when things were pushing together? How did these things form, and why are they so critical for us to be watching right now?
Well, that's an excellent question. And I'll tell you, Christy went out there and collected some incredible maps. And if you guys put this up on the VMO, they will just be wonderful, wonderful illustrations to what we're talking about. But when you look at a map of the Gulf of Mexico, you will see around the Austin, Texas area, but it starts in Mexico actually. You will see those mountain ranges, and they go, they start this. It's an uplift, and I say a mountain range. We're talking Texas here, where everything's pretty darn flat, so it's actually a lifting up. And it goes from around west of Brownsville, and it goes all the way up through Austin, and then it'll head up through Waxahachie, and then it begins to go up into like Ada, Oklahoma, and then it'll split off west of the Ozarks, and it just keeps on going all the way up through your Kansas and Nebraska area there, but it just gets deeper and deeper, and then it starts to sort of play itself out. Well, what happens in Texas is this is where the coastline used to be. 65 million years ago, when the dinosaurs were here, the Gulf of Mexico was right up along this Balcones escarpment, okay, and it was along these areas there. So we actually had a sea coast just south of Dallas. It was the beach. Okay? And then what happens then is it takes a turn, and it runs about 200 miles parallel through Louisiana, and it starts paralleling the coastline, goes through Louisiana, Mississippi, and Alabama. And around Pensacola, around in that area, it will come on back down again, and it does not go into Florida. It's offshore from Florida, about 100 miles into the Gulf.
That's our continental shelf on the west coast of Florida.
Right, that's correct. And so what we're looking at is this was the old ancient seabed, and this is where when the sea levels rise again with the melting of these ice sheets, etc., we will see an increase in coastal waters moving back towards this again. It'll never go back as far in, Michael, because North America and the Gulf are both rising. We are lifting up. So we're never going to see it go quite in as far. But this was the old ring of fire, if you will, because this used to be the seabed, it used to be the Gulf, and so everything else was the land a little bit higher up. Well, the New Madrid coming down, what makes the Mississippi River is a fault zone called the New Madrid Fault. And if you want to envision a bathtub, okay, a nice old bathtub, and then you're going to fill it full of sand, and then you're going to put one little trickle from the faucet of that bathtub so that you've got one little stream of water running right in the center of that bathtub, the rest is sand. That is the Mississippi River, and that is the Mississippi riverbed. It's a big old bathtub full of sand, and all we see is that little trickle of water. That is an old earthquake zone. It's a strike slip, meaning that it slips back and forth. And it stops about Louisiana. And it stops where that old ring of fire was, you see. Mm-hmm. So way back when the Gulf was all the way up into Louisiana, all the way up, the Mississippi River stopped right there. What we're looking at now that the Gulf is pulled back and the seashore has lowered, we're just looking at just some new river channels that it's just running downstream. But technically the New Madrid Fault does not make it all the way into the Gulf because technically the Gulf is really along Austin and East Texas, and it runs through Jackson, Mississippi. That's the real Gulf floor. It just happens to be up above the water's edge at the moment. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I have a question since I'm living in West Florida. Okay, our continental shelf that I just mentioned goes out pretty far compared to the east coast of North America. We go out in the Gulf pretty far. That's some pretty shallow water compared to the depths of, for example, where Deepwater Horizon was.
Right.
Now, if we've got this magma that I believe you said was, we have it in the Caribbean and it's going north, that things are rising, it's pushing up and displacing, basically the loaf of bread thing that Christy talked about. It's pushing the ground level higher in the depths of the Gulf. The water has to go somewhere, so we're going to find that out as time goes on. since we're so shallow in Florida, the old geology, does it go under the continental shelf of the old magma and such, or was that separated when things split? Because you know what I'm getting at is I've had these visions in my dreams and my shaman part of me, so to speak, where I have seen Florida rising, and I've seen some mountainous areas sinking. I mean, is anything like that possible? Could Florida actually rise with this magma building up underneath?
Yes, absolutely. Parts of Florida will, and then parts of Florida may sink or go under. Right.
Well, right now we're seeing that worldwide. We've got England tilting. We've got Japan tilting. England has one coast that's 3 inches down and one coast that's 3 inches up. So the lower coast is getting inundated with water, and they're looking at having to move Coast Guard stations and things because of it. And we're, when you start digging into this kind of stuff, you start seeing this all over the place.
Wow. Okay. So that might not be a theory of what I'm talking about. That Florida could actually rise, because I've always wondered, why do we have such a large continental shelf on the Gulf Coast in Florida compared to a continental shelf anywhere else in the world? It's very shallow water. So it must have been at one time on the surface or awful close to it. That's that's my theory.
Well, you've got
if you'll match the pieces of the puzzle together, at one time it was connected to South America. So it split off from that. So once upon a time, it was a piece of a larger, the Yucatan there. It was a piece of a larger chunk of land, and then it got pushed and spread apart. So what you're looking at is what's above the water level right now is really larger underneath it. So if it begins to rise, then Florida will get twice its width.
Well, and the Earth expansion theory, the title of the show, if you think about it, all the plate tectonics are, yes, there are subduction zones and whatnot, but there are cracks happening intercontinental cracks happening in fissures, the one in Mexico, the one in Ethiopia, there are several in China. And so, everything, the actual diameter of the Earth is probably expanding as well, because just everything's getting bigger because of all the heat that we've got. We've got it coming at us from the solar. We've got it coming from inside the Earth. And when that happens, the plates are going to get looser. And so that's where you see England tilting. I don't know that Florida, there's no way to know for sure what is going to happen, but I don't know that Florida will just go straight up horizontally. It might tip over to some extent.
Well, as long as the western side rises, that's cool by me.
Yeah.
One
good luck
quick
with
question. We're going to take a break here in a few minutes, but one question before we do, and this is for both of you. The Caribbean plate, how was that formed, and how could that affect what's going on with what's basically going on in the Gulf? Will that move, perhaps, or will that rise? Isn't that part of where the magma flow is, in that area called the Caribbean plate?
Well, the Caribbean plate is extremely active at the moment, very active, and part of the Caribbean plate is what they call a subduction zone, meaning that one plate is going under another, and henceforth one plate is going over another. So what we're looking at going on on the Caribbean plate is a very, very active earthquake movement zone at the moment. And we're seeing that. The other day, the Virgin Islands had 75 earthquakes in 24 hours. And so it's extremely volatile. And, yes, so what we're looking at there is probably this part of the Earth's crust is like what's happening off of Honshu, Japan, and the Kermadec Islands off of New Zealand. We're looking at, and again, Great Britain, as Christy had mentioned, the UK. We're looking at islands that are going to tilt, and some are going to go up on one side and some are going to go down on the other, because their undercrust is really, really colliding with these movements. And that's what's happening in the Caribbean. My guess would be is that the Caribbean is going to get smaller. We're looking at the Atlantic Ocean pushing over against the North America and South American plates, and the Caribbean is in the crossfire here. So I think we're looking at a lot of activity in the Caribbean in the days to come, much more than we'll in the Gulf.
Maybe going back to the way it was, where North America and South America had a big pond in the middle called the Gulf, that we now call the Gulf of Mexico, and that
right.
split out when things were pulled apart. We might see it come back
right.
together. Who knows? But that's
right.
good. I see. That's the information I was looking for, Dr. Janet, about how I forgot the name you called it, where the one plate is moving over the other. Okay,
yeah.
That's important information in my book, because that explains all this kind of activity that's going on in the Caribbean. All right, we're going to take a break here for about 3.5 minutes, and then we'll just come back. I want to bring up some things about how a lot of this could be coming about because of things like the photon belt, the Mayan calendar, how that might come into all this. Even the possibility of the old Ring of Fire that I described at the beginning of the show with possibly the lost city of Atlantis. Who knows? So let's have the rest of this continue on in just a little while here. And I will play a song sung by an Australian. It's a Bob Dylan song. The times they are a changing, which no doubt they really are changing. This is sung by Roy Buckley down in Australia, and I like to play it, and he gave us permission. I could never understand Bob Dylan. He mumbled too much when he sang. Roy, I can actually understand. So enjoy this for about the next 3 minutes, and we'll be back shortly.
Informed, enlightened, alive and amplified. This is the Living Light Network.
And this is Michael Edward. We're back with our second hour, and we'll just see where we go here. I think we covered a lot of things in the first hour. And if there are any questions, I'd like to open it up with the phone lines. If you'd like to ask Dr. Janet any of the geological questions or with Christy, please feel free to call in, and we'll get you on to ask your question. That's 424-258-9302. Again, that's 424-258-9302. If you're on Blog Talk Radio with us live right now, you can put a question in the chat, and we'll make sure we ask it. All right, well, I kind of gave a hint of where I want to go with things besides our geology and geography lesson that we've had for an hour here already. We have things that have been foretold about what happened in the past with our geology and what will be happening soon as we enter into another phase. And one of those is the much talked about the great story of time, they call it, the Mayan calendar. Well, my research and research of people before me, such as Robert Ghostwolf, who wrote quite a few books about it, it's a great story of time, is the Mayan calendar, and it's not the end of the world in 2012. It's simply the end of one phase or one cycle going into the next. A lot of people don't realize that the Mayan calendar is based on no different than any other calendar, so to speak. It's based on star movements, and part of that is the photon belt. Now, the photon belt was the beginning of the Mayan calendar, and it now comes to the point where it's the end of the calendar, so to speak. There are 5 cycles in the Mayan calendar, and we're at the end of the 5th cycle. The zodiac is basically the same thing. There are parallels that go between all the different stars and movements. Now we have modern science. It's talking about the photon belt and such. Somebody who spoke about this years ago was Robert Ghostwolf in 2 of his books. One of them was Last Cry, and I believe he mentions more of it in Winds of Change. You can find those books still on Amazon, and I'll have Lynn post it right now in our chat just for those that are on here live. I wanted to bring that up because in the Mayan prophecies, there was and I can't remember the Indian name for him at the time, but he's known as the Pale Prophet. And he spoke about how these cycles had happened in the past and how it would happen in the future. And he was talking about exactly the kind of earth changes that we're going through now. It's not the doom and gloom thing that everybody's trying to say. Mayan calendar says it's the end of the world. It's not the end of the world, people. It might be the end of the geography and air and things like that as we know it now. But the dinosaurs became extinct. They lived through cycle 1. So everything changes, and that's my point. The Mayan calendar has been misunderstood, misread by so many, just like the true old zodiac, which isn't even being used anymore. Things have been manipulated and changed. We are going to go through changes. Geology changes will happen. Robert Ghostwolf he was a geologist, and I'm trying to remember. He had 3 different doctorates in religion and religious archaeology, and he had studied things around the world. And he came up with a lot of the things that we're speaking about now. He even claims in one of his books that according to the Turtle Island and the Mayan and the Incan legends and their old basically their equivalent of the Egyptian hieroglyphics and such, it was all the same back then. Their picture writings and their myths and their old prophets spoke about the great city and pretty much described it as Atlantis, and that it was on the western the eastern shore of what we now call Mexico. So who knows? Is it true or not? Who knows? But one thing that is a reality is our electromagnetic changes that are going on physically within the entire world. Now, that can be everything, and Dr. Janet, this is what you're going to speak about in your new book. And by the way, you're back on here with me live.
Okay.
Both of you are.
Okay.
I want to talk about electromagnetics, and we had mentioned this on our last show, Dr. Jan, where pole shift. All right, which is another thing where some people are just talking absolute trash. They don't know what they're talking about when it comes to a pole shift. All right, in ancient geology, in the proof that you had told me last time we did a show together where there had been 5 major pole changes. Are we seeing one now? Can this be, I know it is, but I'm asking this as a question. Are we going through slight pole changing now, and is that the reason that we're seeing this magma flow starting to happen in North America and other places of the world, the water heating up, even the active volcanoes on the surface like in Iceland? Is that a probability that's because of the electromagnetic changes where we're seeing the poles begin to change as well?
Yes, and I'm happy to have Christy on because Christy is editing my new book for me, and she's on board with me, and the amount of research that has gone into this book has just been absolutely immense. I started noticing changes as a geographer and a geologist back in 1991. And that's when I first began writing this book and first started putting all of the maps together. And it's been a 30-year process, 20-year process of pulling it together. And no one could really understand what I was trying to tell them, what I was seeing with ancient mapping. And the changes began 10 to 20 years ago with our climate and with the shifts of the Earth's pole. And now, of course, it's upon us. And now people are it's a buzzword now, polar shifting. But you're right, Michael, people don't have the science behind it, which is what my book is going to show. It's going to show all of the science going back 500 million years ago. Mm-hmm. There have been 5 major extinctions on the planet, and there has been 5 major shifts in the geographic poles, and those happen to coincide and be right at the same time. And at those time periods, we have had what is happening at this particular time on our planet. We have had an increase in planet temperatures, an expansion in the planet itself, like our bread rising. I love that analogy, Christy.
Thank you.
We have, at all 5 times, and as of today, our magnetic field has been way down. We have also seen the resonance of the Earth speed up, so meaning that the energy that the Earth emits is speeding up, it's increasing, and that is happening now, and that happened 5 times before. So what we've put together is what has happened in the geologic past is happening today, and this is all natural. We have a rise in CO2, and we need to separate man-made greenhouses, greenhouse effect, and man's contribution to global heating from the Earth, because the 5 times before we have had higher levels of CO2 in the atmosphere, and we didn't have cars and machines back when the dinosaurs were here. Those levels are increasing now, and volcanoes and Earth heating can do that just naturally. We're also seeing a lot of planetary paths crossing. We have a lot of planetary activity going on out there, out in the solar system right now, and that has happened about every 26 million years. We have a lot of activity with other planets, other comets, other stars coming into our solar system. That is happening today. So I believe that what the Mayans were showing us and telling us is what we're looking at, Michael, is a cycle that is beyond our planet. It is a cycle that is a galactic one, a universal one, and it has occurred before, and they have recorded it to the best of their ability because they didn't have the technology that we have. If Atlantis had that technology, it was destroyed, when Atlantis went under a tsunami. So what we're looking at now is just beginning to see the evidence that this cycle is now coming back to full circle. Were you going to say something, Christy?
I was just going to say that I have an analogy for that as well. Picture a washing machine, and you have your dirty clothes, and you put your dirty clothes in the washing machine, and everything is twisting and turning and washing, and the little particulate matter of dirt, the evidence, if you will, that Atlantis existed, got washed away and destroyed and broken up. So this is why, finding artifacts and whatnot, there's no way that we can really prove or disprove Atlantis. And many people have so many theories about where it was. I mean, it could have been over in Greece. It could have been in the Atlantic Ocean. It could have really literally been anywhere. But what we're looking at is convection of the Earth's crust. And things are coming, parts of the crust are going up, parts of the crust are going down. There have been artifacts found in the Mid-Atlantic Trench, ancient artifacts dug up when they were burying electrical cable. So there are things that do pop up from time to time, but I think we're talking such a big change that most of that has gotten lost.
But there is evidence of approximately 500 ancient cities at the depths of the ocean floor. They have, because of our technology now, we've identified 500. So Atlantis seems to be the one that sort of rises to the top as the premier ancient city of mystery. But there's 500 other locations down there. I think what we're looking at is, again, that we're going through a cycle, and that's what the Mayans were telling us with their recordings, that it is a natural cycle that really actually has very little to do with the Earth itself. It's the outside galaxy and the universe itself that is cycling as well. And we've just reached sort of like when the odometer on your car turns back over to 0, 0, 0, 0. We're now just flipping it back over to 0, 0, 0. Now, what I have found, Michael, to prove that this has happened 5 times before, can be found on the seafloor, and that is the evidence of the various locations of the magnetic pole. And the magnetic pole, we know, has flipped from north to south and south to north and back again numerous times in geologic history, in our history, so that when you get your compass out, north is actually pointing south. And, of course, to us it's very relative, because how do we know that we're not at south now at north? And you know what I mean? It's kind of silly that we're so stoic about, it has to be exactly this way. But the positive and negative poles have flipped to where we've had positive on one end and then the positive has gone down to the next. The thing that we need to remember is that the magnetic poles on any planet, Saturn, Venus, Neptune, the magnetic poles on any planet are going to be located very close, within 20 degrees at the maximum, to their geographic North Pole. And that is because of the rotation of the Earth and because of the shape of the planets. They're round. They're not perfectly round, but they're spheres. So when a sphere rotates, and I use an example in my book about a tightrope walker. When it's on the rope, it extends its hands out, or it has a pole to help balance its body, so it's in a perfect grid, XY grid. And the Earth will do the similar thing. It's got to balance itself as it rotates, and it wobbles a little bit, but for the most part, as it spins about 1,000 miles per hour at the equator, the magnetic poles and the geographic North Poles are going to be at a balancing rod point at the north tip and at the south tip. And the magnetic poles will always be located close to the geographic pole. So I went back and I mapped 500 million years of the locations of the magnetic pole. And there were some locations of the magnetic poles to where the North Magnetic Pole was at the equator, at our equator, which means that our geographic North Pole was once located at our equator. So we have taken for granted that that the geographic North Pole has always been up there where Santa Claus is. We've taken that for granted. It hasn't. It's been down in the tropics. And I believe that we are heading that way again, that we are slipping down and moving our location closer back towards the equator.
Wow.
That'll blow your mind, won't it?
Yeah. Well, and scientifically speaking, they're finding that over the past 40 years, we have been speeding up. Our magnetic pole has been speeding up in its movement. There is scientific data out there supporting this. Something
I had studied years ago, back 2003, 2002. I was studying about the Schumann resonance. Have you ever Okay, good. Oh, we're on the same page.
Oh, yeah. We have to be in our business.
The Schumann resonance was basically the pulse of the Earth, so to speak. And there was a man back then, Greg Braden, who was really studying this as best he could. And he'd gotten some Russian and I think it was Norwegian and Russian studies back then to find out more about it. And basically the Schumann resonance as the pulse, the electromagnetic pulse of the Earth, he had predicted that we would see these weather changes, and it would show up in the Schumann resonance, our electromagnetic grid, so to speak, and that as the grid changed, so would the poles, and that it was somewhat predictable that as we would see the Schumann grid, electromagnetic grid change or kind of warp itself in an area, we would actually see Earth changes to coincide with it, along with the changing of the pole. And of course, that's nothing new. The Norwegian and Russian scientists had been studying this back in, the 30s, the 40s, and German physicist Schumann, he's the one who was named after, if I got it right, back sometime in the 50s, he started to study all their previous works. And now we're seeing all those theories are actually realities, where you can coincide with the electromagnetic. Now I'm talking about the natural electromagnetic changes, along with Earth changes that coincide and parallel each other. Now we've got another equation in there. We've got the messing around with the electromagnetics by the military and such with their extra low, extremely low frequency and sonars, and they could have also possibly triggered premature changes in our electromagnetic grid. So we've got a lot of factors in here. We've got possible artificial changes. Then we have, as you put it, the universal changes, which really, to me, that's the photon belt, because that actually coincides with the cycles even on a Mayan calendar. So there's no doubt we're going through changes, including electromagnetic shifting of our poles, whether it goes north to south, south to north, or ends up, as you said, the old one where the north was actually on what's our equator now. We're going to have these changes happen no matter what. It's part of the cycle. We've been through it, as you said, Dr. Jan, 5 times in geology. That's proof. Mayan calendar happens to agree with you with their 5 cycles, and even other ancient religions and Babylon and such, some of the things that they figured out in some of their picture writing, so to speak, agrees with the same thing. Even with the Egyptian, people that have studied it are all saying it's all the same thing. What's happening supposedly in 2012? Well, it's not the end of the world. It's the change in the world. Yes, our poles are going to shift or possibly reverse or whatever they want to do when it comes to magnetics. The Schumann resonance is showing this already. In fact, they've shown it for over 15 years. Well, that's the part that I studied about. I'm sure you got a whole lot more. So there was my introduction. Go continue with that. Our magnetic field, how is that affected by what happens not only internally with the Earth, but then our external forces? If we're going through, which to me is proof already, this photon belt, we're seeing the changes in the sun and the CMEs and all this happening. This sounds like it's right on time and the cycle is working the way it's supposed to.
Absolutely. And the thing that we need to remember when you're talking to me about this is that when we talk about the magnetic poles shifting, you also have to add that the geographic poles will change locations also. And those are two different things, two different poles. We've got a little bar magnet in the center of the Earth that shoots a positive one direction and a negative the other. But we also have what it would be like an invisible skewer going through the planet, and that is our physical balancing rod that doesn't have anything to do with the magnetic pole. So we have two separate invisible poles on the planet, a physical one to keep balance and equilibrium, and a magnetic one that drives all of the electromagnetic frequencies on the planet. And there are millions of them, the electromagnetics. We are electromagnetic. Our brain operates that way. That's how you can move your finger through an electrical impulse. So we're looking at two different shifts and changes. We're looking at the magnetic shift and change, which technically wouldn't change life forms that much. We would just have to readjust that north was in a different direction. In essence, our electromagnetic poles would be upside down in our bodies. But we have to also remember that there is a physical north and south pole, a geographic north and south pole. Now, for those to switch directions and to match up with the electromagnetic pole, we're looking at changes in the direction that we face towards the sun, which is a difference in where we grow our food, what freezes, what doesn't freeze. The Sahara may become heavily forested. Siberia in northern Russia may become a thawed-out, fertile farmland. And Northern California may take the place of Alaska. So we're looking, and Antarctica may now move up to where Brazil is. Australia would shift down to be where South America, the South Pole is now, Antarctica. We're looking at physical changes on the planet. And the Mayans they didn't have magnets back then, okay? And they didn't have satellites and cell phones and televisions. So I believe that the Mayans were making a reference to a physical, locational change on the planet, which would change its life forms. We would have a different type of existence evolving to adapt to the different environments and the different degrees of sunshine, which means New York City and Miami and LA and San Francisco aren't really going to exist anymore because they may not have the resources, or we might not have the same satellite type systems. So I think we're looking at our planet making big changes with the life forms that are on it, and that we're going to return more to a more natural existence than such an artificial one, because that may not be possible in the way we're doing it today. It might be. We may have more technology. It's hard to say, but there are big changes coming, and those are going to be created and precipitated by the physical planet making these changes. It's nothing human societies have done. It's the Earth that's making these changes, and we're going to have to adapt to them. So we are at the end of something that we've been familiar with for 10,000 years or more. We're at the end of the same old way of doing things and looking at things, and now there's a new beginning set up by the Earth itself.
Well, yeah. Let me go back to the Schumann resonances, because that'll agree with it. It was measured at just below 8 cycles per second for decades and decades. In fact, the military, if I'm remembering correct, U.S. military and even Britain and such, back in World War II, had set everything to that. I think it was 7.8 or 8.
It was
7.9. Okay.
7.8.
Yeah. Trying to remember from things from many years ago, but they had set everything on that base, and right now, from the last thing that I found out, we're above 13 cycles per second at this point. Now, how does that effect, or is that actually showing the effect of what's happening in the Earth? Is it the Earth that is affecting the Schumann frequency, or is our Schumann frequency electromagnetic pulse, so to speak, affecting the Earth?
I say it's a little bit of both. I mean, because you've got, everything is connected by energy. We don't have just planets hanging out around the sun. There's a static electricity theory that they've discovered that kind of connects the planets together. It's what causes the lightning on the Earth. And so there's electricity all around us. And so what we're looking at with the Schumann resonance is a change in that conduction and the amount of that electricity. And that could be directly attributed to the photon belt theory that you mentioned earlier.
Well, that would make sense.
And also with the influences of the sun, definitely.
Yes. Yeah, because the sun and the Earth have electricity going between them. And then the Earth and the Moon has electricity going between them. And then all the planets are interconnected into that as well. So if you picture invisible spider webs between all the bodies in the solar system, it's pretty complicated. These electrical connections are very complicated. And with everything heating up the way it is right now, because the sun is heating up and acting strange, the Earth is, Mars is, all the planets are, you're looking at a change in the way the solar system's electricity is being conducted.
Well, and the sun's going to be affected, with the photon belt, no different than the Earth. In fact, maybe more so. So we have kind of that spider web, just our small spider web.
Right.
We've got effects within it because the sun is what's keeping that together. If the sun is affected, every planet's going to be affected. So, well, let's get back to the Gulf. Go ahead.
Well,
go ahead.
Let me hit the Schumann one more time here.
Sure.
Let's look at the physical side of it as well. Let's look at the Earth side of it too. Let's say that you are a long distance runner, okay, and you keep a nice pace, and you're jogging, and you've been jogging about 3 or 4 miles. Well, your heart is going to begin to increase. You're going to begin to sweat. Your whole entire body is going to increase in its resonance. Okay, and right now the Earth is extremely active. It normally rotates at a very consistent 1,000 miles per hour equator, and everything is in synergy with those movements. The ocean currents, the atmospheric currents, the tilt of the Earth when it shifts, everything has been in an equilibrium for a very, very long time. Well, right now we're having some Earth changes. It's heating up from the inside, so our runner is getting hot, okay? He's running on a very, very hot day. And we're looking at the Earth's axis is tilting and shifting because it's heavily weighted on the North Pole, Northern Hemisphere. And we've got more water coming into the Earth right now, and it has to readjust its balance with that. So when if that runner were to run a little faster, its heart rate would increase even more, right? So the Earth right now is its rotation is very unstable, and it's wobbling and precessing a lot. And its rotation has sped up in a way. It's rotating wider, okay? So the circle of rotation from day to night is a little bit wider. And so what we're looking at is an increase, okay? Our runner's heart is beating faster the faster he runs. So we're looking at the resonance, and the Schumann resonance is increasing and getting faster because the Earth is a little bit more active at the moment. It's actually speeding up.
Well, and scientifically, after each of these major earthquakes that we've had in the past year or two, after the 2004 tsunami earthquake in Indonesia, they have calculated the Earth has sped up after each one by 26, 30 or so seconds. On top of that, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, so henceforth, we're seeing
right.
the Schumann and we're seeing the electromagnetic resonance increasing. Right.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
Wow.
Well, yeah. We're just
I'm trying to absorb all
here.
this. I'm a listener. I hate being a host because I just want to sit back and listen to you guys and ask questions. It's just a lot to absorb. I mean, not just from what's going on with the Gulf of Mexico, but looking at the whole picture. It's amazing. We're now walking through some amazing times that perhaps mankind has done this before, but not quite this way, and not exactly with these circumstances. It's kind of exciting and kind of eerie all at the same time.
Well, Michael, if we had given more respect to our scientific community, if we had taken the time to honor our history, and I'm talking our ancient history, and to study the Mayans and really study them well, not judge them, not try to put them in a certain compartment because of our fear of a possible ending of a lifestyle that we know now. If we had really taken all of what we've mentioned today to you on the radio, and we had put this into textbooks, and we had taught this in our schools, we would have such an immense appreciation and respect and understanding for the Earth and the changes in our solar system, in our galaxy, and in our universe. And everyone would be maybe a little afraid about, okay, we don't know what all of this means when it comes to the end of the day, but we surely understand how we've gotten to the end of the day. Mm-hmm. And it just gives you so much more respect that the planet is so much more powerful than any of our governments, any of our militaries. This planet is an immense, powerful entity. And I really don't believe that human beings have any or much influence on the cycles of this planet, that they've occurred for millions of years and they will continue to. And we're not talking the end of the world. The Mayans, like you said, were telling us that it was the end of a cycle, mm-hmm. and that things will be different, hopefully better. At the end of this cycle, we know so much more than the Mayans knew. We would have to hope that at the end of this cycle, the next cycle that we start is better. You know?
Yeah, I know. Well, I want to bring up that Mayan calendar is not the only unique calendar along the same way. In Africa, I've been around the world. I've been really fortunate to be able to go into lots of areas and be able to study local cultures. And there was something that I found that was very common with Africa and Central America, Mexico, South America, and even some of the old textbooks and such from Europe, was the symbol of the circle as the cycle of everything has a beginning, and the beginning is at the end. It's the same as above, so below. It's that figure eight on its side. It's however you want to put it, but all of them, every civilization that we have now, most of them what we wrongly call third world civilizations, they have things that have handed down from generation to generation to generation, no different than the Mayans, and it's all this symbol of a complete circle, and they all have their divisions in it. Some are divided into 4. Some, like the Mayan calendar, are divided into 5. Some are divided into 6. But it all goes the same thing. And it's funny, they all run on this 13 or doubled to 26,000 year cycle. And that's what I found out in my religious artifact findings, which is my thing on the side. That's what I love to do. I love to go study the stuff that's not in the modern books, simply because they were giving us the answer. We've put it aside, like you were saying with scientists such as, yourself and the scientific community, had they paid more attention and started studying all these things, we would realize a whole lot better where we're at now and what might be to come and how it's going to possibly affect us. Obviously, we're going to have some strong effects electromagnetically alone. And then the physical effects of what the Earth does. The Earth is a very intricate creation, and mankind is just as intricate, if not more intricate, than the workings of the Earth that we don't even understand yet. Everything's going to change, and mankind is going to change. The surface of what we physically see as the Earth is going to change. These are the things we have to understand.
Well, I think in order to really promote knowledge and learning, we need to understand that there has to be a paradigm shift, because the way our modern science has been operating is a theory or a proof of something is very one-dimensional. And that's not the way the universe works. That's not the way the Earth works, the solar system, any of it. And, Janet and I will be the first ones to say, these are theories that we are putting forth to you based on what we are observing and the scientific data that we are gathering. And we are doing our very best to give you as accurate a picture as we humanly can. But we're not perfect, and we're not God. So, things might be slightly different. And we love input, but the problem with modern science is scientists these days have a vested interest in being correct, and 100% correct. So they only look at what makes them correct. Mm-hmm. That's the problem with solving, I have a pre-med background. That's the problem with some of our solutions to disease. They test to find out, okay, what is causing such and such a disease, and they look at one thing at a time. Well, the world doesn't work like that. There are many causations for one disease. It can be related to diet. It can be related to environment combined with the diet. It can be related to hereditary thrown in there. And what if you throw in a virus? But when they try to break down disease, they only go by, okay, how many people have this specific gene? Well, that's not giving them a true picture of the disease, because they're not taking everything into account. And that's what the modern textbooks and the modern scientists have done. It's supposedly, if it's in these textbooks that these kids are learning from, then it is the gospel truth. Mm-hmm. And it will never change. But there is plenty of evidence out there to say that these textbooks are wrong in some cases and should be changed.
Well, there's something that I've recently been studying, and I'm just getting into it, about wave genetics, mm-hmm. which a lot of people have never heard of that. But I was looking at it simply because I wanted to see how genetics were changing with the Gulf of Mexico particularly. But in studying that, I've realized it's all part of the picture, whether it's synthetic biology involved or not. Electromagnetic changes, such as with the Schumann resonance, our electromagnetic grid, those changes affect us genetically. And this is something that, again, why is it the Russian scientists have been studying things like this for the past 50 years, and especially the past 30 years, and we don't hear about this in North America of those kind of studies, and yet, the Russian scientists, for some reason, and the Norwegians and the Danish, they all seem to be up on all this stuff, and this is information that I wish that I had a decade ago, like when they were first talking about it. It would have been nice. But, yeah, all these things affect, and our genetics will be affected, and our physical world, as we've seen it, is going to change just as much as we, as mankind, are going to change, and that is something that I think people are just going to have to start to affect. it's not going to happen like a light switch in my book. That's my opinion. It's going to be gradual changes, but nonetheless changes that do happen.
And Michael, if we had a very good, clear-cut information network going on all of these changes, all of these earth changes, or my work with the dangers of diet sweeteners, cancer cures, whatever is out there, how to better, grow our foods in an environment that is getting hotter and drier, that kind of thing. If every topic that involved human survival on this planet were well presented and well studied, then we would be able to understand earth changes and survive earth changes with so much less chaos and devastation. But instead, we've let profits and the almighty dollar drive our decisions to where we've made decisions that have not been in synchronicity with nature or with the planet. And such as today, the wastewater treatment system in New York City has sprung a leak, and so there's wastewater in the water supply of New York City.
Oh, well, that's kind of like the East River has been forever, but that's all right.
Right, and we've got double-decker bridges going over earthquake zones. We've built housing developments on floodplains. We build cities on coastal regions, and that can be flooded or hit by devastating hurricanes. I think what we need to do is try to reorganize, and maybe with this new cycle of awareness that's coming about that the Mayans have warned us of coming, maybe we can go back and reevaluate that we can live as a culture around the world in a little bit more basic synchronicity with the earth that actually provides us the life and our sustaining of life on the planet. And maybe we can not build these megatropolis cities and not depend upon oil for transportation. Maybe we can actually find ways to create our societies using the free energy, geothermal, solar, wind. And maybe we can try to not put a nuclear power plant on a subduction zone, or drill oil wells over a magma dome so that we can preserve all of the life forms on the planet. This way, when natural disasters occur or when earth changes occur, it won't have such a devastating effect on us as individuals or a society. But we've been irresponsible, totally irresponsible. And in essence, we've brought about a lot of our fears about what's going to happen in the future, because we have irresponsibly had a relationship with the planet, and the planet's on the move, and we're not prepared for it. We don't even understand it.
I think in some ways we understand it less than what ancient cultures did, because they seem to have written down pretty well what they knew exactly was not only going on at the time, but what was going to come according to that 26,000-year cycle, Mayans being one of many. So,
right.
Well, and I think a common thread is, anthropologically speaking, ancient cultures were more socialistic, whereas we are egotistic. We have to come up with the individual theory that makes us famous instead of participating in a sharing of ideas that really causes enlightenment.
How true. How true. That was an excellent point.
Thank you.
We've had since Tesla, we've had perpetual motion motors that can create electricity. Once they're started, they don't need electricity to keep going. They're perpetual. That technology has existed for decades, and yet, just like you both said, what do? We put nuclear power plants on fault lines, and for what purpose? And that's why I like what you just said, Christy. That is for our ego, for mankind's ego, and has nothing to do with getting in tune with the earth and the physical things around us, and going basically back to simplicity. Our ego has put us in one heck of a dead end.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's, I'm sorry, I think that's what the change, the going back, the beginning and the end of the circle is hopefully going to be about, is people coming together, and let's put ego aside and let's share our ideas and really enlighten everyone. And nobody tries to get rich and famous off of anything. I think Janet and I both do the research that we do out of the love for the research and the love for the planet. We're not trying to make $1 million. We're not going to make $1 million. We're just doing this because we love it.
Well, I spent, like I said and mentioned before, I spent so much time in third world countries, which is it's a complete stupid term, but that's what the world says. Right. In so many ways that the world says that that's third world. And you know what? I think it's the opposite. I think the industrialized is the third world, and believe me, I would rather be back in the bush in Africa or up in the mountains in Brazil or in Costa Rica because of one thing. And you just mentioned that, Christy, that true community, and you said socialistic, but I'm going to put a different term. I'm going to put family community, because that, I went as a religious Christian orientation to go there and help them, and it ended up that when I was in those different countries, in the bush, in the middle of nowhere, first white man they'd ever seen, that kind of stuff, they taught me. So I got the two things combined, and I learned from them the most valuable thing that we, as mankind, as humanity, are going to have to get a hold of really quick as these changes begin to come around more and more, and that is simplicity of living as a community, as a family community. Everybody has their part. Every child is every parent's child. Every parent is every child's parent.
Right.
That's how it's going to have to work that way. We're going to have to go back to basics, and that ego is going to have to disappear. The industrialization has run us into a brick wall. We're going to have to get back to the simplicity of life, and that is both a physical and a spiritual level.
Right.
Michael, in my book, which, by the way, is titled Move On to the Highest Mountains, taken from an ancient American Indian tribe that said, in order to survive, you must move on to the highest mountains. And I also think that they're meaning spiritual, too. You move on to your highest spiritual mountain. You go to the peak, the best you can be. But I have a proposal, I've created a city in the book as a solution to the technological corner we've backed ourselves into. And that solution is that we have a hub, a larger city hub, and Stockholm, Sweden has done this. It's a perfect example. We could do this around every major city in the U.S. They have then smaller mini communities that are capped at no more than 15,000 people per community. And I've created the perfect city to be in the United States, and along the same lines. Every city is capped at 10,000 people. Every home has no less than 1 acre of land, and then you have your farming communities, of course, so that all of your residents, they have a water well, so that each mini city is on its own water well. The city is paid for by the residents, so there's no investors involved. The banking is all local money and local banking for the mini community. They're all tied on to alternative off-the-grid electric power through wind power, geothermal, and solar, so that if one were to go down, the other would put it right back online, which is cheap free energy. The schools are all local. and the teachers are local. All of the local pharmacy, grocery store, everything is locally supported by the local farmers, and all of the employees are the people that live within that mini community. These communities are connected to the larger city by rail. So if you want to go into the bigger city, you're connected that way. And that leaves automobile transportation or any type of dependency on one energy source, such as oil or gasoline. It doesn't have any place there. There is no monopoly of anything. And if we were to put many cities, and no building is allowed to be over 4 stories high.
I like that.
So if you had an earthquake, if you had a tornado, if you had a tsunami, if you had a volcano, if you had any natural disaster, you would have your community to not only protect one another, but then to restore when the damage was done with local money and local labor. Mm-hmm. If we had our United States set up this way, we wouldn't have wasted land. We wouldn't have built over valuable farmland. We wouldn't have polluted the heck out of every piece of land in the country. Mm-hmm. You know, and we wouldn't have the chaos that we have today. When there is a cycle change, when there is a natural disaster, when there is an earth change, we wouldn't have the devastation to the communities that we could have in the future.
Well, I hate to end this wonderful 2-hour broadcast, but we got about a minute left. Let me just say thanks to both of you. This has been an exciting show. Like I said, I hate to be the host sometimes. I'd rather just listen. But at least I can ask questions. I do have privileges.
Oh, yeah, you ask great questions.
But I just want to thank both of you again, because I'd like to continue with this. So let's set this up on a future show. I'd like to take it into other steps. Go
okay.
and bring more things into the equation, so to speak. So thanks again. It's really been a blessing for me, and I hope that we were a blessing for everybody else. And you've been listening to the Golf Update with Michael Edward, and I had as my guest today Dr. Janet Starr Hull, and researcher and editor for Dr. Janet's new book, Christy Whitaker. So thank you both again, and let's do this again.
Okay.
Okay.
Bless you, Michael.
Okay. We'll talk to you later. All right. So that's where we had it today. That's where we've been. And I hope you enjoyed the show. This will be podcast on livinglightnetwork.org, along with all our other shows that are on there. Every show that we've done is on there. So join us at livinglightnetwork.org, and always catch our shows archived and even there live. Appreciate it. And everyone, just be blessed and continue your walk and let your living light shine.
Informed, enlightened, alive and amplified. This is the Living Light Network.
A volcanic plug that releases pressure from the inside of this massive planet will always be an active release location. And what we're looking at with the Gulf is some areas that we thought were long played out in dormant, and they're not. And that is something that even geology books haven't updated yet. We're looking at an active Gulf earthquake and volcanic zone that is extremely ancient, at least 250 million years old, but it is not inactive nor is it dormant. It is coming back to life. The interior heating of the Earth is expanding, which is this Earth expansion theory you had mentioned. The interior of the Earth is heating up and getting hotter. So it's like looking at boiling water or boiling magma, and it's bubbling and rising and expanding as it makes its way to the cooler Earth's crust. But as it does that, because it's expanding and boiling, it's taking the crust and literally heating the crust up. and it's venting out with magma or even just outgassing. And it's coming out every orifice on this planet. Those are old earthquake zones, those are old plate boundaries, and those are old volcanoes and new volcanoes. And so what we're looking at in the Gulf is the Gulf is heating up at the crust, at the ocean's floor. It is heating up, and it is expanding, and it is rising. And as it lifts, so it appears that the Gulf of Mexico is lifting up with an underflow channel of liquid molten rock and heat. And as it begins to lift up, it then will start using those openings of the oil wells that we have drilled in the Gulf. All right, so what we're looking at is an expansion of the Gulf floor underneath the sea floor at the bottom of the Gulf, and we're watching it expand. And the vent holes that we have created through the pegboard of oil well drilling, Michael, that we see now at the floor of the Gulf of Mexico, at the sea floor, they are now becoming vents for this rising magma.
Well, thank you once again for joining us for our Friday afternoon Gulf of Mexico update. Today, I get excited about shows, but this one I'm really excited about because things were brought to my attention by one of our guests, Dr. Starr Hull, and I started looking into things. And there's a lot of stuff I didn't know living all those years in Texas and now here in Florida. And there's something called the Earth expansion theory about the Gulf of Mexico. And that was all news to me, but then I started digging into that. There's lots of ancient volcanoes in Texas and coming up in the Mississippi, and even one at the mouth of the river, Mississippi River, called the Door Point volcano. I've learned a lot just trying to figure out what this show is going to be about. So I'm really excited. I've got two guests on. The first that I just mentioned, and you've heard her on my shows before, Dr. Starr Hull. She's out there in East Texas, not too far from where I used to live, actually just down the road. And one thing that we've had with Dr. Janet in past shows is about detoxifying and such, and she does have her doctorate with I've got a blank now, with natural and nutritional health care and such. But she does have her bachelor's in geography and geology from University of Texas at Austin, and her master's in science was environmental science at Texas A&M. So this is a part of Dr. Janet that we haven't heard on my show before. And with her is her researcher and an editor for her internet sites, and it's Christy Whitaker. And just to get the main things out of the way, if you're not in our chat here on Blog Talk Radio at Living Light Network, if you're not signed in and you're hearing this in the archives, you can find out about Dr. Janet Hull at janethull.com. That's a good place to start. She's got her newsletters, everything there. That'll get you to all her other places. And in case that name might be familiar with some of you, she was one who authored the book called Sweet Poison about aspartame and such, of her own experience of detoxifying herself with it. So check out Dr. Janet Hull.
And for the heat that is expanding and building up underneath the Gulf floor. And so what we're looking at some of these wells are exploding, as we well know with the BP oil spill. And we're looking at cracking in these pipelines. And we're looking at venting with the Gulf as it rises up in elevation with magma underneath the seafloor. And we're watching this come up. and it's affecting the hundreds and hundreds of oil wells that we have punctured the Gulf of Mexico sea floor with. So we're seeing those results in that respect.
Well, as for the uplift, mentioning the uplift on the west side of the Gulf and in Orange, Texas, there has been localized flooding recently, but there's not been rain. And I discovered that after we noticed the 100-degree temperatures, water temperatures, between Houston and up and around Louisiana. So that, to me, and I think to you too, Janet, says uplift.
Well, and you know, Christy, you just recently went on today and captured some information about some recent fish kills in Florida that actually happened today on the 22nd of July.
Right. In North Naples, there was a fish kill, evidently lobsters, cowfish, toadfish, eels, which you said were deep water species.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, you know, having been watching all the fish kills and the bird kills and everything, it really seems to me that the outgassing that we're experiencing from the volcanism under the Gulf is probably contributing in a large part to the fish kills that are really happening everywhere. They're happening off the Pacific coast as well, in along California shores and Oregon shores.
Well, I think I'm back, guys. Here's something odd about this fish kill that started actually 5 days ago or so. It's not just one fish kill, it's been continuing. Something odd about it is people that I've spoken to, particularly a person on Bonita Beach, said, yeah, there was the fish kill one day, then we had a little bit the next day, but the third day, the water was murky black that was coming ashore. So I don't know what that might be a sign of, whether it's some of the oil, and you'll understand why I'm excited to have her as a guest again. I always am. So let's see, we got all that out of the way, and if I get lost here, I have a really bad connection, and if I get lost, they're just going to continue with me until I call back in. But Janet, I believe I've got you on.
I hope so. You hear me?
Yes, worked out great. Let me get Christy on here. Christy, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you just fine.
Well, see, everything's working good now. We had a lot of fun. At least I did for 10 minutes before the show started. I was losing everything, so I guess we had to move those lightning storms out of the way so I could have my connection.
Good. That's
anyway,
Michael, just move them out of the way.
That's right. I had to move them out. There are things that now both of you are really going to get into details and such. I want to bring up some generalizations and then just start in and let everybody know what this stuff is. I wasn't aware, Dr. Janet, until we spoke a few days ago. I never heard of the Balcones escarpment that goes basically from Sherman, Texas, up there by Lake Texoma, which is where used to be my stomping grounds, and then going down to Dallas and Waco and San Antonio. Never heard of it before till you brought that up. I never heard of something called the Door Point volcano, which is at the mouth of the Mississippi River. I never heard of the Jackson, Mississippi volcano, which actually the city of Jackson, Mississippi sits on top of the old ancient volcano. I never heard of the Monroe Uplift. I never heard of the Murfreesboro, Arkansas volcano. And something new that is kind of blowing me away, that there was actually a ring of fire in an arc going from West Florida up towards southeast Arkansas, and then coming back down along that Balcones escarpment line down into Mexico, called the Ring of Fire, with all these volcanoes. And I know there's a lot more than that, but I just wanted to get that for an opener. So where do we start? Let's start with this. what brought this up, your phone call to me, Dr. Janet, was about the video that was going viral on the internet with YouTube about 1 o'clock in the morning on Central Time a few days back, where there was 100-degree water basically all along the northern coastline in Mississippi and into Texas somewhat. And it was considered a really odd anomaly. Well, I guess it ends up that it's kind of almost expected, and that's what this show is about. So, Dr. Janet and Christy, start in there. What do you think caused this, and what is this Earth expansion theory? Start giving us some background. You're the experts as far as I'm concerned, so I'll shut up and go for it.
Well, I don't know, Michael. You're doing a really, really good job there. I mean, you pulled it together pretty well. I think that what you are sharing with the listeners is what you experienced yourself initially. It's like, wow, all of this was going on in the Gulf. And what we have done with the Gulf of Mexico, the Mississippi riverbed, going along the coastline of Florida, coming on up into the Balcones around the Austin area of Texas, and shooting straight down into Central America, where it all loops back around there to the Caribbean islands. We have an ancient Earth fault zone there where we had our original separation from South America and Africa, millions and millions of years ago when the continents split apart. And once upon a time, that was a very active volcanic ring, just like what we're seeing right now at the Pacific Ocean, the ring of fire there. And, there's in the Llano Uplift in Texas, there's what they consider an extinct volcano. We have them really all along the Gulf area, onshore and offshore. And because this is so ancient, we're talking hundreds of millions of years old, we just assumed that they were inactive, just extinct and no longer a worry or a threat. But the Earth is waking up right now. It is heating up internally for many reasons. It is heating up externally from the heating up of the sun. And we have some polar shifts going on, both magnetic and geographic shifts going on. And we have a lot of Earth movement happening right now where the entire planet is making shifts. And so there is no such thing as an extinct volcano or a fault zone, an earthquake fault zone that is no longer active. There is no such thing. Every crack, every hole or portal, which would be